Our Bible passage today is from Exodus chapter 5, verses 1 through 18. After this, Aaron and Moses went to Pharaoh and said, "These are the words of Yahweh, the God of Israel. Let my people go, for they wish to observe a pilgrimage festival in the wilderness." Pharaoh asked, "Who is this God of yours? And why should I listen to any demand to let Israel go free? I do not know this God, and I will not let Israel go." They replied, "The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Let us travel a 3 days journey into the wilderness where we will offer sacrifices to Yahweh, or we will be confronted by plagues or the sword." But the ruler of Egypt says, "Aaron and Moses, who are you to take these people from their work? All of you, get back to your work." Pharaoh continued, "Look at all the people in this land. You're holding up their work." That same day, Pharaoh gave instructions to the slave drivers of the people and the overseers. "You will not gather straw any longer for the workers making bricks. Let them gather their own straw. But don't lower their brick quota. They are to make as many bricks as before. These people are lazy, and this is why they whine. Let us go offer a sacrifice to Yahweh. Let them have more work, more servitude. If they work hard enough, they'll stop listening to false messages." Then the slave drivers and overseers went to the people and said, "Pharaoh says, I will not give you any more straw. Go out and find your own straw wherever you can. But not one load of bricks will be subtracted from your daily quota." So the Hebrews scattered throughout the country, scavenging for stubble out of which to make straw. The overseers harassed the workers, telling them, "You must meet your daily quota, just as you did when we provided you with straw every day." The Israelite officials who had been appointed by Pharaoh's overseers were beaten and asked, "Why haven't you met your quota of bricks as you did yesterday and the day before? As yesterday, so today." Then the Israelite officials complained to Pharaoh, "Why do you treat your subjects the way you do? We are not provided with straw, but we're still told, make bricks. We are beaten, but it is not we who are at fault. The fault is with you." Pharaoh replied, "Lazy. You people are lazy. That's why you keep saying, 'Let us go into the wilderness and worship Yahweh.' Now get out of here. Go to work. Find your own straw and fill your quota of bricks." When the Israelite officials were told again they must fulfill their daily quota of bricks and find their own straw, they knew they were in trouble. Ancient words for our present day consideration.
Thank you, Carol. That was a great reading of the text. I can't tell you how grateful I am to be back at St. Andrews. I was gone a month for writing leave, about half of which I lost for the special session. Just got back from Washington, D.C., and it just feels great to be to see the names that are here in the Zoom worship service. We're a remnant. This is a shell of what we were before and what we'll be after we come back together again. But it's very important that you took the time to be here, because under COVID, this is as close as we can get. And it just, for a lot of us, that just is life-giving. And I kind of asked myself, I was so grateful to get back to Austin, and I was asking myself, what is it about this place that I missed so much? And some of it's community, of course. but you can get that with friends. You can get that with the book club. There are lots of social clubs. But what is it that makes a spiritual community different? I think there are three words that I think of when I think of St. Andrews. Two of them are in Greek, but you know the English translation of them. The first one is synagogue, which is a Greek word that means to come together. So that's sort of the communal aspect of it. And that's incredibly important, that we come together and we care for each other and we get to know each other. We take care of each other. The second word is ecclesia, which we get ecclesiastical from. It's the word church, but in Greek, it means to be called out. So just as a synagogue is we're called into community, ecclesia or church means remembering we have a calling out to the world, that we have a message to take out into the world. And the third word more comes from Martin Luther King, the beloved community, which is how those two pieces fit together. A community that loves, takes care of each person. Each person, chooses their own response. But we also feel a calling to change the world, not just to consecrate and do thoughts and prayers when things go wrong, but to go out and really try to make a difference. The last month, I've spent a lot of time on Zoom, and a lot of that was spent with Black clergy. So I've got to listen to a lot of Black sermons, Baptist, the really fiery, exciting presentation that you don't find much in Presbyterian circles. A lot of the time I was the only white person in the room. In fact, I'd say probably most of the time. And it made me understand how lonely some people feel, how lonely Martin Luther King must have felt at the Birmingham jail, and how alone many people of color feel when their needs and concerns are so low on the priority that they're almost like an afterthought. And I knew it, but I was reminded of how much Scripture means to the Black church and how they hear it so differently. Because when they read about enslaved people and a calling out of oppression, that's very personal. That's a part of their experience in this nation. And so the Black church has really been the moral conscience of this nation almost from the start, calling us to teachings that we give lip service to, but we don't always honor them with our lives. So in the sermons these last weeks, about a month, when they talked about worker justice, it was something very personal for them. They weren't getting political. They had people in their community that they loved that work all week long in dangerous jobs, in fearfully dangerous jobs. They have people that work all week long and still don't have enough to pay their rent. And so a living wage is not just a political issue, it's a personal issue for them. And voting rights in particular. The reduction of the number of places people can vote, the reduction of the hours that people can vote, the reduction of the ways that people can vote. When people are the working poor, those can be very, very personal. And in a democracy, to lose your vote means to lose your voice, to lose your power. And so I very powerfully heard our passage, this story of people in captivity, from a different side than my experience as a person of privilege. As a person of privilege, I approach the story almost from the Pharaoh's point of view. I mean, we're a nation of laws, there's power. We have an economic system. If people are poor, they just need to work harder. What I was taught almost sounds like Pharaoh in the story, that if people are somehow being left behind out of the equation, then they must be lazy. I was taught a very passive, a very private form of religion. I was taught that you don't bring politics into the pulpit, and I was almost offended when I first started hearing people do that. But what does it mean to say we love someone in our community when we don't stand up for them? What does it mean when we say we love someone in our community who's being mistreated, who's not being treated fairly, and we don't speak up for them? I think if there were white evangelical Christians back in Egypt, a lot of them would have said to Moses, how dare you go to the Pharaoh? How dare you lobby for workers' rights? Those are political issues. What you should do is just offer thoughts and prayers to the people. You should do magical rituals like communion and baptism. But they would have no sense that those sacraments are a call into the beloved community. They are reserved for the beloved community. They're just as we're called together into synagogue, into community, we're also called out to care about the world, to change the world, to make it on earth as it is in heaven. Jesus wasn't talking about pie in the sky. When you look at the teachings in the Sermon on the Mount, these are concerns for real people, and particularly the weakest and most vulnerable of the people. Just as people of privilege think that political issues are a distraction from the message, so do people who live and serve and pastor to the oppressed feel that calling out of oppression is the message. When you go back and you look at the story, the first sermon I can find is Moses going to Pharaoh. And as the old gospel song says, let my people go. A message of liberation. And Jesus said the teaching that he would give would set people free. Do you think he just meant in some escapist spiritual sense that has nothing to do with your real life? And Paul said that Christ came, Christ for freedom, Christ has set us free. So I think the gospel calls us to a very personal response, not to get partisan, not to get political, but to stand up for universal human rights. When we first started working with people who are unsheltered, people that are homeless, people that are poor, it was very awkward. And we'd have the Thanksgiving dinner, and it's like the room would have two sets of people. It had our privileged people and the people from the streets. And we visited our own group, basically. It's been years since that line was there. People began to realize that it was only by the grace of God that some of us are not on the street, or some of us are not overwhelmed by economic issues. When we took Ilda and Yvonne into the church and they became a part of our spiritual family, then immigration rights was not a political issue anymore. It was very, very personal. Now, let me say something that I think most Americans don't know and don't want to know. And if you don't want to hear this, turn the sound down. But the heart of racism in this nation has never been about hatred. So if you don't dislike people of color, that's not really where the problem comes from. The essence of racism in this country is and has always been based on greed. It's looking at people through the lens of the economy, looking at people through property rights. If you're white here listening to this, when our ancestors went to Africa to kidnap those of you who are people of color, from the African heritage or people of color here that had their land stolen. That wasn't done out of personal dislike. It was done out of greed. Petty, ugly greed. And even in our own day, you cannot separate economic issues from issues of racial justice. William Barber this week, Reverend Bishop Barber, often said, when the Klan began, it didn't go after people of color at first. It went after white people who offered justice to people of color. So to realize that the economic issues precede racism. Racism is rationalization for why certain people can be mistreated, can be underpaid, can be overused, can be given dangerous jobs, can be given dead-end jobs, can work all week and not be able to meet their needs. So when the governor of Texas, or the Pharaoh of Texas, if you want to say it that way, says that we shouldn't teach critical race theory, that we shouldn't teach any history that brings up our racist past, that is an effort to silence the calling, the message. Solzhenitsyn, the Russian dissident, said those who choose power as their goal, and I'm paraphrasing, will have to choose the lie as their method. Because you have to rationalize, you have to reframe it. You can't tell the truth if you're exploiting someone else. This story is as ancient as Egypt, and it's probably more ancient than that. But when you hear the Pharaoh talking, and you hear the slave holders talking, and they say, we're not going to give you what you need to do your job, but we want you to keep up the same quota. And the reason you're wanting human rights or worker rights or religious rights is because you're lazy. That is a refrain that has gone through history. And it's the refrain that the Jews were called out. It is the refrain that people of color have heard themselves called out in the Black church. And it's the refrain which you and I, as well as anyone else listening, white, black, it doesn't matter, abled, disabled, it doesn't matter what your human condition is. We are all called out of that system of slavery and oppression. There's a protest song that I used to dislike a lot. It says, "What side are you on?" And I think we have a calling to love everyone and to treat everyone equally. At the same time, I think we have a special obligation to care for the abused, for the people that are oppressed. And again, whether your descendants came from Africa, whether they came from Europe, whether they came from Asia, whether they came, it doesn't matter. We are all called out of systems of oppression. And it's not enough for the slaveholder to love the enslaved. Those chains have to be broken or it's abuse. So however much you love the slaveholder, you've got to protect the enslaved. However much you love the rapist, you have to protect the survivor of sexual abuse. However much you love the oppressor, you have to defend the oppressed. It's not unloving to do both of those at the same time, to see the humanity of those that are oppressing and also the humanity and the greater need of those who are being oppressed. It's so sad in the story where the people get mad at Moses, the oppressed people get mad at Moses for making the Pharaoh dislike them. And what happens is we all begin to identify with the oppressor. I think that's why in the Batman show, they never beat up the real villains. They always beat cronies of the buildings. We have this deference to people in power. And that includes oftentimes bullies, that we have to unlearn that. And so the people in Egypt, the Jewish people in Egypt, looked at themselves and said, Moses, you're trying to get us free has made us loathsome to the Pharaoh. One of the big shocks that I had when I started working with survivors of sexual assault was how often they blame themselves. I got to meet Crystal Mason this week. She is the woman who had finished her prison term, was out, and did not know she couldn't vote. She was not told she couldn't vote. So she cast a provisional ballot, and is now facing 5 years in prison so that the leadership of Texas can say there's voter fraud. She was there much of the week and basically crying the whole time. However much we love the people that are doing this, we have to protect the people that are being mistreated. I remember when Jesse Jackson showed up. I had the unfortunate experience of speaking right after Jesse Jackson, and I recommend that you don't do that. But when he showed up, I had a sense of how long and bloody this road has been for the Black churches. And he would do a chant that me as a person of privilege, I just have never needed to say that. But he would start off by saying, I am somebody. And then the people would repeat, I am somebody. Because what happens is you begin to see yourself through the eyes of your own oppressor, unless somebody sees your human worth and calls you not only out of the slavery, but out of that sense of self-loathing. I met a young mother who was on the march, and like me, kind of a person of privilege. She wound up being arrested in Washington. There were like maybe 300 people that got arrested. And afterwards, she sent me this message. She said, I woke up this morning with the overwhelming desire to confess to a priest. So here goes. I kind of looked like a priest when I had the black shirt on, but she knew this was kind of tongue in cheek, that part. But she goes, and this part is very sincere. She said, the moment I was baptized and the moment I accepted Jesus into my heart, they never felt like I thought they were supposed to. However, this past week was that. I felt God's presence, awakening, clarity, overwhelming gratitude, desire to do better, go deeper, love harder, and last but not least, complete confirmation from God during every twist and turn of this adventure that I live with God's Spirit grounded inside me. All I have to do is stay tapped in. Rabbi Heschel used to say when he walked with Martin Luther King that he felt he was praying with his feet. And I think what I love so much about St. Andrews is each one of us does that in a different way. Not everybody can march. One of my favorite scenes this week was marching along and looking to the side and seeing George and Linda Brown holding their signs on the sideline. They did not have the health latitude to march themselves, but they got as close as they could. Some people sent messages. Whatever people do is a part of what the community response. So that being said, I love being back at St. Andrews. I think that for all of our imperfections, and we're certainly imperfect, we do try to be a synagogue for one another. We try to come together, love each other, care for each other. We try to be an ecclesia, people called out with a message of hope and love for the world. But we also try to be the beloved community, to live a life of gratitude, celebration, and reverence. I want to close with the hymn that was sung several times this week. by my Black clergy friends in this struggle. When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. So God said, go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell all pharaohs to let my people go. Well, that is my perception about today's text. I invite you now to reflection on your own.
Marilyn will lead us now in our hymn,